Hey guys, welcome back. This is episode 10 of my real estate investing series. We are going to be talking about how to get the best possible chance of passing the board interview. The things to say, the things not to say, what to look out for, etc. The co-op board interview is a mandatory part of the purchase process if you're buying a co-op in New York, with the exception, of course, of if you are buying a sponsor unit. That's the only time that if you're buying a co-op, you don't have to bother with the board interview. However, the odds are that if you are buying a co-op, you are going to need to sit before the board in the form of an interview. The co-op board interview is one of the last steps before closing on your purchase of a co-op. So by the time you're called in to meet with the board, they have already reviewed your application and they like what they see on paper enough to request to meet you in person. So for that reason, I want to kick this video off by saying don't sweat it too much. If they hated you and wanted to reject you, they would have done it before ever requesting that you come in and take up their time with an interview. Many times the interview is merely a formality and the board will use it as an opportunity to get to know you, get acquainted, speak in person. So you don't need to be a nervous wreck about it, but you definitely want to make sure that you don't mess it up. So in this video, I'm going to give you all the tips that you need to do your best. Of course, this isn't a guaranteed magic bullet, but I am going to be covering in this video the things that are most important to the board and how to best address them. Also, keep in mind that you always want to be honest. Yes, we're looking for an approval, but nothing justifies lying. So take the tips that I'm covering in this video to develop a general understanding of what the boards usually feel is a perfect candidate, and then apply it to the confines of your real life to choose what you want to highlight. Every co-op board is different. Some are highly selective and some are very liberal. Something to keep in mind is that the way the board interview goes tends to foreshadow what the experience is going to be like living in the building. So if you feel like you're getting ripped apart by the co-op board requirements, or that you need to become someone that you're not just to be the persona that you think this board is looking for, then maybe this isn't the right community for you at all. There are plenty of buildings that might be a better cultural fit than one where you feel that's happening. Just like on a job interview, you want to be honest, but you also want to intelligently choose the aspects of your life that you can highlight in order to present yourself in the best possible way. My first tip for doing well on the board interview is to review the house rules before the meeting. You don't want to have anything that the board might mention regarding the rules of the apartment come to you as a surprise during the board meeting. Be very familiar with the house rules. If there are any rules or policies that you find within the house rules of the co-op that you don't agree with, this is not the place to bring up your opinion. You really don't want to seem confrontational or too opinionated at this time. Tip number 2, if you have small children or a pet, do not bring them to the board interview unless you're specifically asked to. Some stricter co-ops will actually want to meet your child or your pet, and if they do request this, they're likely trying to see if they're wild and crazy or if they would be excessively disturbing to the neighbors. If you are requested to bring your child or your pet to the board interview, do anything that you possibly can to ensure that they are calm and collected and happy during the board meeting. Bring entertainment materials for the kids. I would not recommend a phone or an electronic because it does look rude if your child is like plastered to their screen during the interview, but maybe bring like a coloring book if as an emergency, while the child is not being addressed by the board, maybe they can occupy themselves and color while you are having the rest of the conversation. And of course, ensure that they are well fed before the meeting. Every living thing gets hangry, so it's best to just try to prevent that. My next tip is to arrive early. This is a non-negotiable. You must arrive at least 15 minutes early to the board interview. Give yourself some time to breathe, to settle in, to relax. Keep in mind that usually the board schedules these interviews for a time that they are already planning to hold an existing board meeting. This is the time that the board members know they're all available and they're already going to be together, and they hold the board interview as part of what they're going to be doing in their regular meeting. These meetings usually begin around 7 p.m. on a weekday. That's when they typically tend to occur, which means that it's already getting later into the evening, and your board interview is probably not the only thing on the agenda that they have to accomplish that night, and they're not trying to be there forever. So get there early so that they can bang out your interview and be done. Having to wait around for you if you're late before they can get their meeting started and get on with their night is going to set things off on the wrong foot. You showing up early is a very easy thing that you can do that would show a great amount of respect for their time and have things get set off on the right foot. Next tip, show up clean and well dressed. This is your first impression that the board will have of you. Dress business casual. You don't have to appear overly formal, but I also personally would not show up in flip-flops. Wash up beforehand, try not to look frazzled or sweaty, and it's that simple. My next tip, smile and relax. The simplest fact of all is that you come across best when you have a warm smile and relaxed body language. This is the easiest thing that you can do to immediately give off good vibes, show a friendly demeanor, and make a nice first impression. Next tip, don't let this one make you nervous, but operate under the rule that anything you say can and will be held against you. It's just a safe way to go about this interview. This is not the place to get overly chatty or reveal too much about yourself. The point of the interview is for the board to have an opportunity to specifically get any answers to questions that they had about you. It's not the forum to volunteer too much information about yourself or get too relaxed. You want to briefly and directly answer the questions that you're asked, but don't go on tangents, don't over embellish, and don't provide any information that you weren't specifically asked about. You never know what's going to trigger someone, so it's best to just keep the conversation around exactly the things that you are asked. Next tip, do not get political. It is legal for the board to ask you questions about your political alignment, so if this happens, don't get thrown off, but definitely try to remain as vague as possible. You, however, should never be the one to bring up politics. Our current climate is the perfect example of a situation where it's easy to make a political statement without even planning to. With everything going on right now, a bold statement might just slip. So if the board members are going through formalities, asking you how you are, you're better off, instead of expressing your very understandable stress about things that are going on right now, you're best saying something like, you're doing as well as one could during a time like this, or simply honestly just that you're fine. Don't express any positive or negative feelings around anything that's going on in current events unless you're specifically and directly prompted to. And if you are, it's best for you to simply say something that shows that you're a compassionate person while otherwise staying as general as possible. Next tip, communicate job security. So the concept of job security and you wanting to show that you have job security comes up in pretty much every episode of this series. But again, the co-op's main concern is making sure that you will be able to pay your maintenance on this apartment for the duration of your ownership. For this reason, they want to see that you have job security. The ideal candidate is employed full-time in any stable industry. An example of a job that would be less appealing to a co-op board is something like a freelance designer, where there are periods of downtime and no guaranteed paycheck. The co-ops like to see regular and consistent paychecks coming in. If you're in an industry that's commission-based, where you have irregular paychecks, then what they're going to look for is your length of employment within this industry. If you can show that you've been doing the same job for several years and that within those years your income hasn't dipped too low in any one given year, then that should suffice and make them comfortable. So a question that the co-op board might ask you in relation to this concept of job security might be, how do you like what you do? So this would not be the place to share that you're planning on quitting your office job and taking a backpacking backpacking trip around the world to find yourself. They may ask you how long you've worked in the industry. Of course, here it's the longer the better, but don't lie. Feel free to mention any positive accolades that you've received for your work and your intention to stay the course. Next tip, show that you're a good neighbor. The board is very concerned with making sure that you are not going to be someone that your neighbors don't like. The board's job is to make sure that everyone in the building is coexisting happily. So they may ask you questions about your day-to-day schedule or your noise levels. You really want to communicate that you are aware that you are living among others and that you're considerate. If they ask you if you enjoy hosting parties, for example, you don't want to say anything that would lead the board to believe that you are loud or disruptive. If you do host gatherings, you can let the board know that you do enjoy the occasional dinner with close friends or family, but ultimately that you are mindful of your surroundings and that you're living close to others. Next tip, you want to avoid conversations about extensive renovations. This is not where you want to volunteer that you're planning on converting your brand new 1-bedroom apartment to be 3 bedrooms and that you are knocking down the wall in the kitchen. The board really doesn't want to walk into anything that seems really complicated or have construction going on that would be annoying to the neighbors. You should only be speaking on the topic of renovations if you are directly, specifically asked about it. If you're buying an apartment that obviously needs a gut renovation, if it's very outdated, and the board asks about your renovation plans, you could say that you're planning on giving the apartment the TLC that it needs, while of course adhering to the renovation policy that's outlined in the house rules. If the apartment that you're buying does not require renovation, then there is no reason for this topic to be discussed during the board interview. Again, you want to always be responding with the truth and always reiterate that if you do decide to do any renovation, that you'll be sure to follow the policies that are outlined in the house rules. Next tip, you want to stay clear of volunteering whether or not you have any intentions of joining the board during this interview, unless of course you're specifically asked. This is not the forum for you to talk about what you would like to change about the building policies or that you want a position of power in the building. Next tip, if you are asked about your hobbies or what you like to do in your free time, you want to try to keep your answer as wholesome as possible, and don't volunteer that you have a hobby that's particularly loud, like if you practice your electric guitar from your apartment. Next tip, oftentimes the board might ask why you chose this apartment building. If you're asked this, it's best to stick to the positives. For example, you don't want to say that this building was your second choice. You want to express your high regard for the neighborhood, list any positives you can, and let them know why this building stood out to you. So do you like how well the building is maintained or landscaped? And you can compliment the board for their work on that. If so, then do that. Next tip. This one may be surprising, but if you are asked if you have any questions, you actually don't need to have any questions. So unlike a job interview where you're expected to come loaded with relevant questions, for this, you really aren't expected to have all that many questions. It's really best to actually keep this as short and sweet as possible. If you do really feel compelled to ask a question, it's usually safe to stick with a community-oriented question. For example, you can ask if the building holds any gatherings for residents to mix and mingle and get to know each other. Or maybe what's the best way for you to get to know your neighbors and get involved in the community. And for the final tip, this one is important. If there is anything problematic that would have come up in your background check or anything that you know the board would be aware of if they looked into your criminal history, for example, the board is probably aware of it because they've done your background check at this point and they're likely going to ask you about it. You 100% should not be the one to bring it up, but in the event that they do bring it up, you want to go into this interview with a clear and concise explanation, summing up what occurred, keeping it as positive and brief as possible, ultimately explaining that you were able to resolve the issue and move on with no further complications. That would be the best way of addressing anything negative that has occurred in your past. And that sums it up. Those are my tips that I give my clients while preparing them for a board interview. Of course, this isn't one size fits all. Every buyer has their own sets of concerns and things that they might want to prepare for when it comes to the board interview. Overall, the biggest thing that is the most important is for you to just be calm and friendly. And remember that most of the time, the board board is not trying to catch you on anything to reject you. Usually the board is looking for the sale to be completed seamlessly because it benefits the building as well as you when you're able to complete your purchase transaction. If you have any particular questions on this topic that you would like for me to answer, feel free to email me anytime. My email address is christina.cremidas@element.com. Additionally, if you have any real estate questions whatsoever, I'm always happy to answer you. You can send me an email anytime at all. If you enjoyed this video and if you found any value in it whatsoever, I urge you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click on the bell icon, which will make sure that you're notified whenever I post new videos. Finally, you can follow me on Instagram to get a glimpse into my day-to-day life. I share real estate stuff, I share home stuff, and everything in between. So Instagram is a really great way for us to get to know each other a little bit more personally. I try to stay on top of my DMs and answer as quickly as possible, so definitely follow me there. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope that you found it really helpful. I really appreciate that you guys have been so into this video series, and it's been so cool to see that there are so many like-minded people out there that are setting themselves up for success in the future by making intelligent real estate investment decisions today. Thank you guys again so much, and I will see you next week.